A real all-round powerhouse. That's the title of this video, right? And I think it's the best expression I found to define this beast of a bike. The Suzuki GSX-S1000GX. Yes, Suzuki, like most Japanese brands, right? Isn't that good? In marketing, naming, some complicated things, some design choices that are also a bit curious and hard to explain. But the fact is, if you put it on a spider chart, right, everything this bike does in terms of performance, in terms of handling in the city, on the highway, on a mountain road, on dirt, to travel with the bags here, it's even hard to find another category of bike, right? I'm not talking specifically about just this model here from Suzuki, but one that does so many things so well. That's also why they're highly desired by thieves, especially here in Sao Paulo, right? But since we don't make videos just for people in Sao Paulo, what a great bike for daily use, huh? This is the Supreme Sport crossover, according to Suzuki, right? I like making videos about bikes, any category of bike. You say, oh, this bike here is a custom. The first or second comment is, no, it's a custom bagger. Oh, this bike here is a big adventure bike. No, that's a mid-hyper trail. No. People have an obsession with wanting to categorize. Actually, brands keep creating niches, right? Any brand, whether it's motorcycles or cars. The thing they like the most is to say, because this model doesn't fit into any category. It inaugurates a new segment, right? And you also see it being called a hyper tourer, hyper grand tourer, right? A tourer. But what is a tourer? What is a crossover? They are similar things. One is a bit more for the highway, but originally we're talking about a big adventure bike here, right? A motorcycle that has the geometry, frame, caster angle, that kind of thing of a big adventure bike, but more focused on asphalt, right? With tuning, suspension tuning, with tires much more suited for asphalt, which at the same time makes it a crossover, right? It's taking the concept from one segment and crossing over, right? Moving into another. And also a tourer, right? A bike that's really great for hitting the open road, and we're going to do that with it soon. You can see here that it has the factory original bag set with the unlocked option. Okay. You have them on both sides. The finish isn't the most luxurious, right? You recently saw on the channel the Moto Morini Calibro bagger, right? Which has a nice leather covering, and it's a much cheaper bike, right? The Moto Morini is a 5 bike. Obviously, they have nothing to do with each other in terms of segment, but specifically, the bags here on the Suzuki don't really match the price, right? We're talking about a bike that's on sale now for $93,300 plus shipping. Let's call it a crossover. This color here, sparkle black, right? It's a pearlescent metallic black. There's also candy red, which is red, and the classic Suzuki blue, right? Which would be my choice. I always prefer the racing color from any brand. And on this bike, above all, to justify this price, besides an outstanding performance, you have a lot of technology. We have a 19-liter tank and a 1000cc engine. 152 horsepower, right? The same engine as the legendary GSX-1000R, right? Suzuki really has this heritage of racing, of competition. They've even been MotoGP world champions. And it has, right, what bikes in this segment almost always have nowadays, which is the suspension with inertial sensors, constantly adapting, right? An active suspension that keeps responding to all the bike's parameters, right? Speed, lean angle, the slope of the ground, to keep adjusting the suspension and bringing the right stiffness, the most suitable level of firmness. You navigate these menus here, you can see the 6.5-inch TFT display, very complete, very functional, easy to read. The design is a bit elaborate, and I'm not really a fan of the ergonomics of these little buttons here either. There are 3 riding modes, right? Active, basic, and comfort. It's a bit strange, right? Why not sport, normal, and comfort? The windshield is a bit low, and to adjust it, you need tools. We don't have the tools. You can raise it, but out on the open road, there was a bit of wind in my face. You also have the standard lever guards here. You have, as you'd expect from a good Japanese sport bike, another category, right? Since we're mixing up the categories. A 4-cylinder that, let me put it in neutral. Neutral here, let me put it in sport mode so it can also give its loudest growl. Not sport mode, in active mode. 4,000 RPM. It's a bike for you to show off in front of the club. It's also a bike in that typically Japanese style, with a very elaborate design, you know? And it ends up looking really aggressive. It has a certain stance. A stance that's somewhat distinct, but I'm not sure if it's really distinct. If that's actually for the better compared with its main rivals, which would be the Tiger 1200 from Triumph and the R1200 GS line from BMW, right? There are the more street-oriented versions of these two bikes, like the Tiger Sport, for example. We also have, as you've already seen here on the channel, Moto fluids from the factory, right? The first fill for all J Toledo bikes, Suzuki, Zontes, Howdo, among others. All of them leave the factory with Moto lubricants, and Moto lubricants are also offered for maintenance throughout the dealer network. But, as I was saying, it has a very aggressive, sporty stance when it comes to design. In a segment where, let's be honest, right, 100,000 raised for a motorcycle, the audience isn't really looking for that kind of aggressiveness, right? And we know that both the GS models from BMW and the Tiger models from Triumph sell like crazy in Brazil, even though they're high-ticket motorcycles. Brazil is Triumph's biggest market in the world today. BMW Motorrad has, in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, also has Brazil among its top 5 markets. And Suzuki here, imported by J Toledo, right? It's not an official subsidiary. It struggles a bit in terms of volume, especially because when we look at this bike, right, 100,000 reais, all the technology, everything it offers, versus the dealership experience that Suzuki brings in Brazil, right? Which means sharing the same group dealerships. Then those brands I mentioned, Raul Ju, Zontes, Kinko, more low-cost brands. You don't have a premium experience at the dealership either when buying or in after sales like you do with the arch rivals, BMW and Triumph. And that might help explain why it's not so common to see a GSX-S1000GX on the street like it is to see a BMW GS or a Triumph Tiger. But when you get on and accelerate, what a machine, my friends. So, hop onto the chin mount. Let me show you a little bit of this beast in action and accelerating in the real world. Let's go. So I'm going to start our test ride here a little differently. Let's wake up our 4-cylinder 1000cc engine here. Check out the little animation on the TFT display. You can already tell we're really talking about a hyper custom, right? Why did I want to start while standing still? Here, to show you a bit of the electronics, right? The active suspension, the CS Suzuki Advanced Electronic Suspension, right? Gyroscopic sensors, right? It's something that top-of-the-line bikes have. And we're talking about a 100,000 Rs bike, right? They usually have it nowadays, especially those with sporty intentions. And then we have 3 modes, right? The active mode, right? The sport mode would be the active mode. Then when you come here, there's the basic mode and there's the comfort mode, right? It should be sport, normal, and comfort, right? But why make it easy if we can make it complicated? That's pretty typical of Japanese design sometimes, isn't it? So you see that it adjusts all the parameters, right? So for example, regarding traction control, suspension, and engine response. And you can also customize all of this separately, right? You can go into the suspension settings and change it, right? Here, regarding how many people there are, if you're carrying luggage, 2 passengers, etc., etc., you can come here on the traction control and manually increase or decrease it, right? You're talking about Japanese ergonomics. If you want to increase the traction control, you press down. See? Down makes it go up makes it go down. Anyway. Just to give you a sample of how sophisticated it is, right? Let's take it off the 2-passenger setting here. Let me see if I can change the suspension here. Put it in active mode because we want to show the performance of this beast here in all its glory. Range of 271 kilometers with a 19-liter tank. The average fuel consumption reaches 18 on the road in daily use. We're going to leave the suspension in the star of the show here, the automatic mode, right? Because it will understand what Primirita wants. We have a quick shifter in both directions, right? We're in 2nd gear here, 1 up, 3. You can see it shifts without using the clutch. 1 down, 2, also without using the clutch, which is another thing that's become really common, right? It's unacceptable nowadays to have a motorcycle costing over 60,000 Rs without a quick shifter. And it's interesting, right? Suzuki, the V-Strom 650 is the cheapest Suzuki today, right? It's close to 60,000 Rs. Yeah. Suzuki, look, 1st gear really works even at low speeds. When you put this bike into first gear, my friend, take it easy with your right hand here because it's really insane. And I'm showing a bit here in the city. Let's speed up a bit over there on Castello, because even though these Tours are extremely capable bikes, right? For all kinds of terrain, even for the track, we can say that. But here in Brazil, they end up being bought by a certain type of consumer, a very specific consumer profile, right? A quick shifter in the city is a lifesaver. Because first of all, who has 100 grand to spend on a motorcycle? Usually it's not a 25-year-old kid. When this 25-year-old kid has 100 grand to spend on a motorcycle, usually he doesn't spend it on a tourer or an adventure bike. He goes for a bike that's a bit more flashy, less rational, right? So it usually ends up being an audience, typically 50 and older, who buy this kind of bike mostly for the open road, right? Especially this version here with the bags. I don't think this is a bike that's often used as a daily, right? Which is a shame, right? Because if I use this bike as a daily in São Paulo, it can actually handle it, right? Oh, wow, it's agile. It's 232 kilos, right? Which, no, it's a light bike. But for example, recently you saw the Calibro Bagger here on the channel. It's a 200 kilo bike, right? With 700 cc. So for a liter bike here, 232 kilos with all this technology, Showa suspension, big wheels, big brakes, right? It's a pretty interesting weight that Suzuki managed to achieve here, 232 kilos. And it leads to numbers that range between impressive and scary if you stop to think about it, right? That's 152 horsepower for 232 kilos of the bike plus 74 kilos of Casio Cortez. Look how in active mode the quick shifter works, really. It downshifts well, right? That's exactly it. Look, accelerated. Let's do a rough calculation, right? We're talking about the Casio Cortez and bike combo at 300 kilos. We're talking about 150 horsepower, which comes up high, right? Red line at 12 grand. We're talking about a power to weight ratio of 2 horsepower per kilo, right? Yeah. That's race car power. And not just any race car, a fast race car, right? Formula One, historically, right? One of the things that kind of defines Formula One is exactly having a power to weight ratio of less than 1 kilo per horsepower, you know? But let's say about 1 kilo per horsepower, more or less, right? Nowadays the car weighs 800 kilos, the power, with all the challenges of the hybrid system, right? The peak power is about 1,000 horsepower, but it doesn't last for the whole lap. So you could say that the power to weight ratio is just double that of a Formula One car, right? It's a lot. It's when you accelerate here, look, in first gear, you're already reaching the speed limit on the marginal, right? There's nothing like it. This is a real, like Nelson Piquet used to say, right? Racing Formula One in Monaco is like riding a bicycle in the bathroom. Yeah. Riding a GSX-S1000GX in São Paulo is like riding a bicycle in the bathroom. It's hard for us here, look, to light up the shift light, see? I'll try to stretch it a bit in second gear. It's not going to be inside the city that we'll be able to do it, right? And then you have an absolutely explosive performance, right? You're talking about 0 to 100 in about 3 seconds and a top speed of 222 kilometers per hour. We've got a little problem here on the marginal. I just don't know what's happening this April in São Paulo. We've entered a state of constant traffic on the marginal at any time in any direction. So let's do this. Let's wait until we get to the Castello. Then we'll be able to pick up the pace a bit more enjoyably. Just one more measure, right, of how powerful this bike is. And it's still really flexible, right? We're here, look, 6th gear. There are 6 gears in the transmission, 70 km/h. The revs are at 3,000. You'd think it's kind of silly, right? With the revs way down low. Look at how it pulls in 6th gear, just so you can see, from 70 km/h to 110 km/h, from 3,000 RPM to 5,000 RPM on a bike with a 12,000 RPM redline. It was a matter of just a few seconds, right? So even though it has this super bike or hyper bike performance, as they call it now, right? It's also easy to live with, right? In the city with 6th gear and this torque, almost 11 kilos of torque coming in. It also has a very broad torque band. Look, Yeah, my friend. You get scared pretty quickly on this bike here. Let's go through the vein, right? Sport tire, right? It's no wonder these bikes have become so sought after, right? Because they do everything really well, right? Guys, the thieves figured that out, right? We don't just make videos for people in Sao Paulo, right? I wouldn't suggest this bike for daily use there. But outside of Sao Paulo, what a privilege, right? Look, I'm gonna speed up a little now. And our porchetta right there, look. I'm honking a little with the Rainis here. You guys are seeing how the sausage is made, right? We're going as a duo to record at Cine Avião in Araçariguama. Who do you guys think will get there first? We already know, right? Open it up a little, open it up a little. My God, let's do this. Let's speed up a little here, leaving the toll booth so you can get a sense of how brutal this thing is. Let's go. Brake, brake. It's got good brakes too. The initial bite isn't that aggressive, right? But the power is there, clearly, right? So hold on. You can't do it, right? Honestly, this thing's natural habitat isn't really public roads, right? All right, so let's drive right at the speed limit to the Cine Avião in Araçariguama, where we'll come back with our final conclusions. Power. Time extended. We forgot to show another natural habitat of this bike, right? It's not just the highway, it's also the mountain road. I told you, right? The brakes don't have that super strong bite, but that's to be expected on a hyper trail bike, let's call it that, right? Because the suspension travel is long, right? So when you brake, the front end dips, and that reduces responsiveness. But that's what I was talking about, right? The broad torque curve and the quick shifter do the job here. Third, fourth, third. The tighter little turn, second, fourth. Third brake. There's grip here to lean it over more. It's a, let's say, this is where the fun really happens, right? This is where it even sets itself apart from more dedicated adventure bikes. Sue me for overtaking on a solid line, but everything was done with common sense, let's say. And first gear is long, right? You see here, you can take advantage of it. You can use first gear in traffic, right? You don't need to keep slipping the clutch in second gear. What a nice bike, what a complete product, right? Like I said, really graphical Arana, hard to beat. It's already inviting me to lift my butt off the seat, to lean more into the longer radius curves here. Fourth gear, brake. Third gear, it's fun to spend the whole day doing this, right? Now let's get to our final conclusions. Let's go. Final conclusions. Some people say that a car or motorcycle is just a product and a price. That's true, right? But it's much more than that. Brand building is very important, especially in Brazil and globally. That's what I mentioned earlier when comparing Suzuki, right? The way Suzuki operates in Brazil compared to BMW and Tiger is made clear in the numbers. If you take just a snapshot of the sport tourer category, which is the focus our friends at Moto use, by the way, shout out to them, they do excellent work over there. The combined sales of the Tiger Sport 800 and Tiger Sport 660, right? Last year they sold over 1,000 units in Brazil. You know, obviously at a lower entry price, but do you know how many units our glorious GSX-S1000GX sold? 76. That's why it's so hard to see on the street, right? But when you widen the scope beyond such a narrow category and include BMW and Triumph, both are in the top 10 in sales in Brazil, even though they're premium brands with volumes last year around 14,000 units. Triumph sold slightly less and BMW slightly more, but they're close in the rankings with similar volumes. Do you know Suzuki's sales? Their lineup is pretty broad, right? We've got the legendary Hayabusa at the top, but we've also got the sport bikes, right? Like the GSX-1000R, and we've got big adventure bikes and mid-size adventure bikes, right? With the V-Strom, we've got this line of sport tourers here with the GSX-1000GX and GT, right? One of them is more fully fared. Anyway, if you check Suzuki's website, they've got about 7 or 8 different models in Brazil, all that just to sell around 3,000 units, right? Suzuki is the 14th manufacturer, or was the 14th manufacturer in the Brazilian ranking last year. So you know who they remind me of? Both Suzuki motorcycles in Brazil and in the car world, Subaru, right? That focus on Japanese engineering, delivering a fantastic product, but some choices in design, communication, and brand positioning end up restricting the brands to a very narrow niche. People who are really very knowledgeable about the brand, very passionate about the brand, who understand the product, which is, yes, very good in both cases, right? But it's worth remembering Subaru has just ended its operations in Brazil, right? Largely because of this as well. The brand didn't know how to position itself for its product, and I think Suzuki has the same problem. Suzuki suffers from that a bit in Brazil, which is a shame because Suzuki motorcycles are really good and Suzuki's history, right? I'm a sucker for it, you know? I'm a sucker for anything that has racing DNA, that has racing heritage, and Suzuki in the world of two wheels has a lot of that. It really deserved a more premium treatment to get more into this market of BMW and Triumph customers, which is indeed very big in Brazil in this segment. Do you agree or disagree? Tell us in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to our channel to support us. And as always, thank you so much, take good care of yourself, and a big hug. Now let me put on my helmet and head back to Sao Paulo, enjoying this big toy. Let's go!